A bankrupt millionaire, a homeless little girl, a buried secret that could bring down a financial empire. When they join forces, nothing will ever be the same. But can they survive the truth they're about to uncover? What happens next will break your heart and inspire you. Stay with us. Dear friend, what you're about to experience is not just a story, it's a deeply human journey about lost resilience and the quiet, unexpected ways love finds us when we need it most. If this is your first time here, I invite you to drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing your voice. And if you're someone who believes in second chances and the hidden strength of ordinary people, and in stories that stay with you long after they end, consider subscribing and tapping the bell icon. We share moments that matter. Thank you for being part of this one. Now let's begin. Everyone laughed. That's what stuck with him the most. Not the betrayal, not the headlines, not the loss of billions. It was the laughter, shrill merciless, echoing through the grand marble halls of the New York Stock Exchange. The mighty Daniel Ross once crowned the genius of Wall Street, now a disgraced, bankrupt man in a wrinkled suit too large for his withered frame. They said his fall was inevitable. They said anyone who built an empire on intuition and bold risks was bound to stumble. But what no one knew, not even his closest advisors, was that the real fall didn't begin with numbers on a screen. It began with a handshake. Victor Caldwell, his so-called brother-in-arms, the man he had trusted with every ounce of his fortune. They'd toasted together on Daniel's 50th birthday inside the penthouse of the Waldorf Astoria. They'd built Ross Caldwell Capital from the ground up, turning a $2 million hedge fund into a $40 billion titan. They were inseparable, or so Daniel had believed. But in a single week, Victor siphoned off $17 billion in assets, exposed Daniel to regulatory fraud charges, and vanished into the shadows, leaving Daniel to face a media storm unlike any in financial history. The headlines were brutal. The fall of a financial king. Ross ruined. Trust no one. His wife left him. His penthouse was seized. Cars, art yachts, all gone. But worst of all was the betrayal. Daniel hadn't lost his money. He'd lost his belief in people. One cold February morning, Daniel stood in front of the courthouse. Cameras flashed. A reporter shouted, "Mr. Ross, how does it feel to be the biggest fool on Wall Street?" And in that moment, with snow swirling around him and the taste of shame on his tongue, Daniel laughed. Not because it was funny, because there was nothing left to do but laugh. The humiliation was complete. He retreated to a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Queens, a man who once owned 5 estates on 3 continents, now sleeping on a pull-out couch. Nights were the hardest. He would replay the board meetings, the lavish parties, the congratulatory handshakes. He saw faces. Faces of investors he'd convinced to trust him who had lost everything. Faces of colleagues who now whispered his name like a cautionary tale. But perhaps the most haunting face was his own reflection in the bathroom mirror. A man, aged beyond his years, hollowed out not by poverty, but by despair. What had it all been for? Numbers, deals, titles. None of it meant anything now. It was during one of these lonely nights, sipping the last of a dusty bottle of Glenlivet 25, that a strange clarity came over him. If everything you've built can be taken from you in a single act of betrayal, maybe you were building the wrong thing to begin with. He thought of his late father, a humble math teacher in Pittsburgh, who once told him, "Build a life, son, not just a legacy." Daniel had ignored that advice for decades. Now, stripped of everything, he finally understood it. With trembling fingers, he picked up a notebook and scrawled one sentence across the first page. It's time to start over. But how? At 54, he was a pariah. No firm would hire him. No bank would touch him. Friends avoided his calls. The world had written him off as a broken man. Yet sometimes it is in the wreckage of your life that you find the first brick to rebuild. What Daniel didn't know was that the first brick wasn't in an office or a courtroom. It was out on the frozen streets of New York, waiting, watching, with eyes far wiser than their years. One small hungry girl selling handmade paper animals in the biting cold, her fate about to collide with his, in a way that would change both of their lives forever. But that's for the next chapter of this story. The bitter wind sliced through Queens that March morning, colder than usual for early spring. Daniel Ross walked aimlessly through the crowded streets, collar pulled high, hands buried deep in the pockets of his thrift store coat. He had no destination. He hadn't had one for weeks. His days had become an endless loop of long walks, cheap coffee, and restless nights haunted by memories of the man he used to be. He was a ghost in a city that had once celebrated his name. That morning, though, something nudged him to take a different turn. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was the small voice inside him that still hoped for meaning. Either way, he found himself wandering into a neighborhood he barely recognized, a part of Brooklyn where the old brownstones leaned wearily against each other, and the sidewalks told stories in worn concrete. A sudden flurry of snowflakes swirled in the air, unexpected and sharp. Daniel pulled his coat tighter and hurried his steps. That's when he saw her. A small figure sat huddled beneath the awning of a boarded-up bookstore. Her thin arms hugged her knees, and a threadbare scarf barely covered her tangled chestnut hair. Spread before her on a piece of cardboard was an array of delicate paper animals, swans, foxes, cranes, each folded with astonishing precision. Daniel would have walked past. He always did now, shrinking from the world and its sharp edges. But just as he was about to cross the street, the girl looked up. Their eyes met. And in that instant, something pierced through his numbness. Hers were not the eyes of a child who begged or pleaded. They were fierce, intelligent, and tired beyond her years. They reminded him of someone he had once known himself, maybe after the fall. "Would you like to buy one, sir?" she asked quietly. Her voice didn't waver. There was no desperation in it, only dignity. Daniel stopped. He knelt awkwardly, his knees creaking in protest. "Did you make these?" he asked. The girl nodded. "They're $1 each, but they'll last forever if you keep them dry." He picked up a tiny fox, its folds sharp and symmetrical. "What's your name, Lena?" she replied. "Lena Hart." "Where are your parents?" "Lena." Her fingers stilled. "My mom. She passed away. My dad's not around. I live with my grandma, but she's sick. She's in the hospital. I'm just trying to manage until she comes home." Daniel swallowed hard. The words hit him with a force he hadn't expected. This child, no more than 8, was navigating a world more brutal than any boardroom he'd ever entered. Across the street, 2 men lingered, watching them with unsettling interest. Protective instinct, long dormant in Daniel's chest, flared to life. How much for everything he asked? Lena blinked. All of them. Yes, she did the math quickly. $23. Daniel pulled out 2 20s, the last cash he had on him. "Keep the change." Lena's eyes widened. "Thank you, sir. You must be hungry. Would you like something to eat?" Hesitation flickered across her face, but hunger won. She nodded. They walked to a small diner a block away. Daniel guided her to a booth by the window. The waitress raised an eyebrow at the odd pairing, but said nothing. Lena devoured a grilled cheese and tomato soup with a speed that spoke volumes. Daniel watched a lump in his throat. This wasn't just hunger for food. It was hunger for stability, for safety, for kindness. While she ate, Lena absently pulled a napkin toward her and began scribbling. Numbers, symbols, equations that looked nothing like childish doodles. Daniel leaned closer. "What's that?" She flushed and tried to cover the napkin. Just numbers. They help me think? May I see reluctantly? She slid it over. Daniel stared. The equations were complex. Some looked like advanced calculus. Others resembled financial modeling techniques he'd seen in hedge fund algorithms. "Where did you learn this?" he asked, stunned. "My grandma taught me some, and I read books at the library. I like patterns. They make sense when other things don't." Daniel felt tears sting his eyes. In front of him sat a child, a genius by any standard, alone in a world that would never see her potential if someone didn't fight for it. He looked at her, truly looked, and made a decision he hadn't thought himself capable of making ever again. "I have an extra room. It's small but warm. Would you like to stay there until your grandma gets better?" Lena stared at him wary. "Why would you help me?" "No one else does," Daniel's voice caught. "Because I know what it feels like when no one helps. And maybe we both deserve a second chance." There was a long pause. Then Lena nodded slowly. That night, Daniel transformed his cramped office into a makeshift bedroom. Lena curled up on the couch, clutching a worn backpack to her chest. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching her breathe softly in sleep, overwhelmed by a strange mix of fear, hope, and something he hadn't felt in months, purpose. For the first time since the world had laughed at him, he felt alive again. The lesson was simple yet profound. Sometimes in saving another, we begin to save ourselves. Daniel had no idea that this fragile act of kindness was about to unravel a story far bigger than either of them could imagine. Mornings in Daniel Ross's apartment became a ritual. Lena would wake before sunrise, quietly folding origami animals by the window while the city outside stirred to life. Daniel, still adjusting to this new rhythm, would shuffle in to make coffee and prepare a simple breakfast. It had only been a week since Lena had moved in, yet the small apartment had transformed. Her presence filled the space with something Daniel couldn't quite name. Hope, perhaps. One rainy morning, Daniel returned from the corner store to find Lena sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, a stack of books beside her, and sheets of paper covered in dense equations scattered around. At first glance, it looked like a child's imaginative play. But as Daniel bent down to gather the pages, a pattern caught his eye. On one page, Lena had mapped out what appeared to be a model of pedestrian traffic patterns through the borough. Another page detailed an algorithm predicting weather fluctuations based on data points from a neighborhood news site. Daniel's breath caught. These weren't random numbers. He remembered his own early days in finance, poring over market data late into the night. The complexity of Lena's thinking mirrored the work of seasoned analysts, except she was 8. "You did this?" he asked softly, holding up one sheet. Lena looked up startled. I didn't mean to make a mess. It's not a mess," Daniel said quickly. "It's extraordinary." She chewed her lip. "I like patterns. They make things feel safer. When I was on the streets, I watched people. If you know when the lunch crowd comes, you know when it's safe to sit outside. If you know which corners the police patrol less, you can avoid trouble." Daniel sat down beside her, heart twisting. "You used math to survive." She nodded. "Grandma always said, numbers tell the truth, even when people don't." Tears pricked Daniel's eyes. He thought about the countless men he'd worked with who treated numbers as a means to power, not as a language of truth and resilience. Over the next days, Daniel paid closer attention. At night, when she thought he wasn't watching, Lena would pull out a battered notebook and scribble for hours. Curious, he peeked at it one evening. The pages were filled with astonishing concepts, simplified proofs of complex mathematical theorems, new approaches to data compression, and advanced coding structures. He barely understood half of it. Realizing he needed help, Daniel reached out to an old friend, Dr. Meredith Shaw, a mathematics professor at NYU. He invited her over under the guise of catching up. When Meredith arrived, Lena sat quietly at the kitchen table, her small fingers folding a swan as they chatted. Eventually, Daniel handed Meredith one of Lena's notebooks. Within minutes, Meredith's expression changed from polite curiosity to open astonishment. "Daniel, who wrote this?" "She did." Meredith turned to Lena. "Sweetheart, where did you learn this? I read books at the library. And I just see how things fit." Meredith closed the notebook carefully. "Daniel, do you understand what you have here? These are concepts graduate students struggle with. Lena sees the world in ways most of us never will." Daniel's heart swelled with pride and a fierce protectiveness. "What should I do? First, she needs a proper evaluation. But more than that, she needs someone to nurture this gift. Left alone, it could wither. With the right support." Meredith trailed off, shaking her head in amazement. That evening, Daniel sat Lena down. "Would you like to go to a special school where you can learn more about math and science?" Her eyes widened with fear. "I don't want to leave." Daniel's chest tightened. "You won't leave. We'll do it together. You'll still live here with me, but I want you to have the chance to learn everything you dream about." She hesitated. "What if they laugh at me?" Daniel reached over, gently taking her hand. "Lena, you are the bravest person I know, and if anyone laughs, they'll have to answer to me." Tears filled her eyes. "Promise, I promise." The following week, with Meredith's help, Daniel enrolled Lena in a special program for gifted youth at NYU. The administrators were skeptical until they witnessed her brilliance firsthand during the assessment. Word of the prodigy spread quickly, yet even as Lena dazzled her professors, Daniel noticed something troubling. At night, she still hid food under her bed. And once during a visit to the library, she froze when a police officer passed too close. She was safe now, but the scars of survival remained. One rainy night, Daniel found her huddled in a corner of her room, sobbing quietly. He knelt beside her. "What's wrong, sweetheart? I had a nightmare," she whispered. "I dreamed I was back on the street, and no one saw me." Daniel pulled her close, tears slipping down his own cheeks. "I see you, Lena, and I'm never letting go." As she drifted back to sleep in his arms, Daniel reflected on the lesson Lena had unknowingly taught him. Numbers may reveal truth, patterns may offer safety, but love, steadfast, unconditional love, is what heals. Their journey was only beginning. Lena's genius would soon draw attention neither of them could have imagined, and with it, dangers they weren't prepared for. By winter, Lena's brilliance had become a quiet marvel among the academic community. A child with a mind that could dismantle the most complex algorithms, who could see patterns invisible to seasoned professionals. But as her genius blossomed, so too did the shadows around them. Daniel began noticing strange figures lingering near the university. A black SUV parked across from their building for hours at a time. He dismissed the first instances as paranoia, leftover fear from losing everything once before, but Meredith confirmed his unease. "You're not imagining it, Daniel," she warned. "Lena's capabilities have drawn attention. Some of it not the kind we want." One night, after Lena's advanced mathematics lecture, Daniel arrived to pick her up. She wasn't at the usual meeting spot. Panic surged. He sprinted through the building calling her name, but the hallways echoed emptily back at him. A janitor approached, concerned. "Are you looking for the little girl? I saw her leave with a woman. Said you'd sent her." Cold terror gripped Daniel's chest. He hadn't sent anyone. Without hesitation, he called the police, then Meredith, then every contact he had. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, the unbearable truth settled in. Lena had been taken. What followed was a blur of flashing lights and desperate questions. But Daniel knew instinctively this wasn't a random act. Someone wanted Lena specifically, and not for ransom. They wanted her mind. Hours later, an anonymous message arrived on Daniel's phone. If you want to see her again, walk away. Stop your inquiries. No police. Daniel felt the walls close in. Every cell in his body screamed to defy the threat, but the image of Lena, terrified and alone, kept him grounded. Meanwhile, Lena awoke in a sterile room, her small wrists bound loosely to the arms of a metal chair. A tall man in an expensive suit approached, a cold smile on his lips. "Hello, Lena. My name is Mr. Caldwell. You're quite special, you know that. We'd like you to help us with some problems." She said nothing. Eyes narrowed. "We know about your algorithms," Caldwell continued. "You could make us very wealthy. All you need to do is cooperate." Tears stung Lena's eyes, but she straightened her back. "I won't help you." The man chuckled. "You will, or your father will suffer." Back in the city, Daniel refused to be paralyzed by fear. He enlisted the help of Sarah Vega, a brilliant cybersecurity expert he'd once mentored. Through relentless tracing and data mining, Sarah found a lead, a private tech compound outside the city owned by one of Caldwell's shell companies. With no time to wait for formal intervention, Daniel and Meredith hatched a desperate plan. They'd track the signal breach the facility and get Lena out themselves. As they prepared, Daniel recorded a message for Lena in case he didn't survive. "You saved me, Lena. You showed me that life is more than numbers. If you can hear this, know that I love you more than anything, and I will always be with you." Inside the compound, Lena endured hours of manipulation and threats, but her greatest weapon was her mind. Quietly, she mapped the surveillance patterns, memorized guard rotations, and mentally reconstructed the security code snippets visible on nearby terminals. Late that night, during a shift change, she exploited a moment of distraction. Using a loosened wire from her chair, she triggered a system fault that forced a door release. Small, fast, and fueled by determination, Lena slipped into the maze of corridors. At that exact moment, Daniel and Sarah breached the compound's perimeter under the cover of darkness. Gunfire erupted as guards spotted them. Daniel's heart pounded not from fear of death, but of failing Lena. In the chaos, Lena navigated toward a service exit. A guard spotted her and raised a weapon only to be tackled by Daniel with a primal roar. Father and daughter collided in a tearful embrace. "I'm so sorry," baby Daniel sobbed. "I'm here." Lena clung to him, shaking. "I knew you'd come." They fled into the night as sirens wailed behind them. Later, in the safety of a hospital room, Lena finally broke down. "I was so scared, Dad. I thought they'd take me forever." Daniel gathered her close. "I would burn the world before letting that happen. You are my life." The ordeal forged a new bond between them, one no threat could sever. As Lena drifted into an exhausted sleep, Daniel sat at her bedside, Meredith and Sarah nearby. The attack wasn't just a kidnapping. It was a warning. There were powerful forces who wanted Lena's mind under their control. But Daniel wasn't the broken man he once was. And Lena was no longer alone in the world. From this point forward, they would face the darkness together, and this time they would fight back with everything they had. The weeks after Lena's rescue were a blur of healing reflection and painful realizations. Daniel had always known the world could be brutal, but facing it as a father with the life of the one person he loved most in jeopardy had changed him forever. The man who had once obsessed over market trends and profit margins now sat in a quiet hospital room each night, holding Lena's small hand, overwhelmed with gratitude that she was alive. Lena, too, had changed. Her eyes, once bright with innocent curiosity, now carried a new depth, a trace of fear, but also fierce resolve. The trauma of her kidnapping had left its scars, but it had also revealed her extraordinary courage. One rainy evening, as they sat together watching the city lights through the hospital window, Lena finally spoke of the ordeal. "Dad," she whispered, "I didn't give them anything. Not one formula, not one code." Daniel's throat tightened. "You are the bravest person I've ever known," he said, voice breaking. "You protected so much more than numbers, Lena. You protected who you are." For a long moment they sat in silence. Then Lena looked up at him, her small fingers still entwined with his. "But what now, Dad? They won't stop. Not unless we do something." That question haunted Daniel. In his old life he might have retreated, sought safety, hidden Lena away. But now he understood some battles must be fought not just for yourself, but for others. "We do what's right," he finally answered. "We take what they tried to use against us and turn it into something that helps others." In the weeks that followed, Daniel Meredith and Sarah worked with Lena to refine her algorithms not for profit, but for public good. Together they founded the Phoenix Initiative, named after the fire they had survived and the new purpose they had forged. Their mission was simple but bold: to create open-source tools that could detect and prevent financial fraud on a global scale, making markets safer and more transparent for everyday people. The first months were grueling. Funding was scarce. Daniel's name still carried a stain in some circles, and Lena's true capabilities had to remain partially concealed to protect her. Yet word of their work began to spread, and slowly allies emerged. One of them was Walter Hayes, an influential tech philanthropist who had followed Lena's story after her algorithms had been used to expose the corruption at Caldwell's firm. In a quiet meeting in a small Chicago cafe, Walter leaned across the table and said, "What you're doing here, it's bigger than you realize. You have my support, and I'll help you find others who believe in this mission." With Walter's backing, the Phoenix Initiative grew. Universities contributed research. Financial watchdogs implemented early versions of Lena's code. For the first time in her young life, Lena saw her work not as a survival tool, but as a beacon of hope. Yet, despite the progress, shadows lingered. The same powerful forces that had once tried to kidnap Lena now worked to discredit the Phoenix Initiative. Smear campaigns emerged, questioning Daniel's motives and Lena's legitimacy. Online forums buzzed with conspiracy theories. One night, after reading yet another cruel article about them, Lena buried her face in Daniel's shoulder. "Why do they hate us so much, Dad? I just wanted to help." Daniel held her close, tears slipping silently down his face. "Because the truth scares them, sweetheart. But remember, this hate is loud because it's afraid. You're doing something beautiful. Don't ever let their noise drown out your voice." From that moment, Lena resolved to speak more openly about her journey. With Meredith's guidance, she began giving talks first to small groups of students, then at larger conferences. The sight of a 9-year-old girl standing before rooms of seasoned professionals explaining complex algorithms with humility and grace moved audiences to tears. At one such conference, after Lena's presentation on algorithmic fairness, an older woman approached her with tears streaming down her cheeks. "My husband lost our retirement to one of those schemes you're fighting," she said, voice trembling. "Thank you for doing what no one else could." Lena hugged the woman tightly. "I'm doing it for people like you," she whispered. "I promise." The initiative's greatest test came a year after its founding. Using Lena's evolving tools, they uncovered a massive scheme involving international money laundering through art and real estate. This time, they had learned from the past. With careful coordination between law enforcement and trusted journalists, the Phoenix Initiative helped bring the perpetrators to justice, saving billions in potential losses and preventing countless victims from financial ruin. News outlets worldwide reported on the breakthrough. For the first time, Daniel's name appeared in headlines not as a disgraced tycoon, but as the father of a genius and the founder of a movement for good. Yet perhaps the most poignant moment came on the anniversary of their first meeting. On a snowy December afternoon, Daniel and Lena returned to the park bench where a year ago a broken man had knelt before a little girl selling paper cranes. Lena handed Daniel a small origami phoenix. "I made this for you," she said softly, "because you taught me that even when everything burns down, you can build something new." Daniel's eyes brimmed with tears as he took the fragile bird in trembling hands. "No, sweetheart," he whispered. "You taught me." Nearby, a group of children from the Phoenix Foundation's new mentorship program gathered, many of them once homeless or at risk, now learning coding, mathematics, and financial literacy, thanks to Lena's algorithms and the opportunities the initiative had created. As the sun dipped below the skyline, casting long shadows across the snow, Daniel watched Lena laugh with the children. The weight of his old life felt distant now, a chapter closed. In its place stood something far more enduring than fortune, a legacy of hope born from the ashes of failure. And at its heart, a little girl who had once been dismissed by the world, now changing it one line of code, one life at a time. As the dust of their extraordinary journey settled, one undeniable truth remained: my life often leads us down roads we never imagined traveling. The story of Daniel, Ross, and Lena was not one of easy victories or flawless heroes. It was the story of two broken souls, a bankrupt millionaire and a homeless little girl finding in each other the strength to rebuild not just their lives, but the lives of countless others. Daniel had once defined success in cold, hard numbers: stock prices, quarterly reports, net worth. For years, he chased a future built on figures only to lose it all in a spectacular fall from grace. The world laughed as he crumbled a man who seemed to have it all one day and nothing the next. Alone and disgraced, he was ready to disappear into the shadows. But fate had other plans. That rainy afternoon in Central Park, a simple encounter with a child selling paper cranes changed everything. Lena wasn't just a homeless girl trying to survive. She was a mind of unparalleled brilliance hidden beneath worn clothes and tired eyes. More importantly, she was a soul unbroken by life's harshest trials. In her, Daniel saw not just hope, but a second chance, one he didn't know he desperately needed. What began as an act of compassion quickly became a life-altering commitment. Daniel's decision to adopt Lena wasn't met with applause. The world scoffed. Why would a failed tycoon burden himself with a child, let alone one from the streets? But Daniel understood something they didn't: when you have nothing left to lose, you are finally free to fight for what truly matters. As father and daughter forged a bond, the true extent of Lena's genius unfolded. From complex mathematical models scribbled on napkins to sophisticated algorithms that could dismantle billion-dollar frauds, her mind was nothing short of extraordinary. Yet behind the equations and theories was a child longing for safety, love, and trust, things no algorithm could create. Daniel's home, once a monument to wealth, transformed into a place of learning, healing, and laughter. He stumbled through parenting with humility, guided by the simple truth that love matters more than perfection. Together, they faced challenges that would have crushed lesser hearts: kidnapping, betrayal, and relentless threats from those determined to silence them. The kidnapping of Lena marked a turning point. The man who once sat in boardrooms debating risk now risked everything to save his daughter. And Lena, even in captivity, showed a courage and resolve that defied her years. Her unyielding spirit inspired not just Daniel, but everyone around her. In that dark moment, they both realized love is not just a feeling, it is a force that demands action. Emerging from that ordeal stronger, they could have chosen safety. They could have retreated from the public eye, lived quietly, and protected what they had rebuilt. But Lena, with the wisdom of someone who had once slept under bridges and calculated survival strategies on the back of old receipts knew better. Justice wasn't optional. It was necessary. Together, with Meredith and Sarah's help, they built the Phoenix Initiative, a beacon for transparency and fairness in a world too often driven by greed. Their work exposed corruption at the highest levels and protected countless victims from financial ruin. Yet they didn't seek vengeance or glory. They sought to give others the very thing they had once lost hope. The most remarkable part of their story wasn't the billions recovered or the criminals exposed. It was the sight of Lena, once an invisible child on the margins of society, standing proudly on global stages, teaching others how to see the patterns of deceit hidden in plain sight. It was the countless lives touched by the Phoenix Foundation's programs offering gifted children like Lena the opportunities they deserved. And it was the simple, quiet moments of father and daughter folding paper cranes together, remembering how far they'd come, that defined their legacy. So, what can we learn from this story? First and foremost, never underestimate the power of compassion. One moment of kindness, a bankrupt man kneeling to buy a paper crane from a homeless girl, set off a chain of events that changed the world. In our own lives, we must remember that the smallest acts of empathy can ripple outward in ways we cannot predict. Second, true strength lies not in wealth or status, but in resilience and love. Daniel lost everything the world deemed valuable, yet through love and the courage to act, he found a purpose far greater than any fortune. Third, genius and potential are not confined to privilege. Lena's brilliance was born on the streets, nurtured by survival. How many other Lenas remain unseen because we fail to look beyond appearances? We must strive to build a society that recognizes and supports talent wherever it emerges. Fourth, justice requires courage and persistence. It would have been easier for Daniel and Lena to walk away after the kidnapping to prioritize safety over impact. But they chose the harder path because they understood that protecting others is the highest calling. And finally, forgiveness and humility matter. Daniel had every reason to be bitter about his downfall. Yet he chose to rebuild not in anger but in service. We all face moments of failure. The question is, do we let them define us, or do we rise and transform them into something meaningful? As you reflect on this story, ask yourself, where can I show more compassion? Who might I be underestimating? How can I turn my own setbacks into opportunities to help others? Because in the end, life is not about what you accumulate. It is about who you become and how you lift others along the way. Thank you so much for spending this time with us today, walking through this incredible journey. If this story moved you, inspired you, or gave you a new perspective, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing powerful, heartfelt stories like this one to life. And don't forget, every like, every comment, and every share helps us reach more people who might need a little hope in their day. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious, and never stop believing in the power of second chances. Thank you for watching.